Let's head back to the United States now. And Alex Shephard, Donald Trump speaking at a conservative political conference. The former president said the Republican Party had been run by freaks and fools and claimed he was the only presidential candidate who could prevent World War III. There you go.
A very big if there. I mean, this has been Donald Trump's political message dating back to 2015 when he first jumped into the race. One of the things that I think is notable about this, though, is that Donald Trump was the president of the United States for the last 4 years. He is still the most influential figure within the Republican Party. So the idea that he can run against the sort of GOP and the Republican establishment, quote unquote, again, 8 years after successfully doing it the first time, I think is quite a stretch. What we've seen is him embrace many of the sort of darker and more, frankly, authoritarian impulses that certainly dominated the very end of his presidency. At that same speech, he told his supporters that he would be their retribution if he entered the White House again. But I think what we're also seeing here is a general shift on Ukraine on the right, where increasingly presidential candidates are, and in fact, even House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy are expressing skepticism about continued support for Ukraine. Donald Trump has said, I think without a great deal of credibility, that if he was in office, he could have prevented this from happening. We know that his plan to have stopped the war would have been to just give Russia Ukrainian territory, something that he, of course, does not have the authority to do in the first place. And I think something that also would have only encouraged Russian aggression going forward. But I think that what we're seeing now are two of his big themes going forward. One is attacking other Republicans as being too tied to old ideas, and another is making or trying to make the election about U.S. support for Ukrainians.
Of course, there is a school of thought that says that the whole reason it started was because of what happened in the years prior. But anyway, that's for another day. Australia's Prime Minister will hold talks with Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak surrounding the AUKUS Defence Pact, and Anthony Albanese on his way to the US.
What we're seeing now is, I think, this treaty group is becoming increasingly important for the United States. The somewhat controversial submarine deal that was signed between these three countries last year, I think, is becoming a real bedrock. And Australia, in particular, is a very important part of the Biden administration's thinking about China. But we're also seeing, I think, a real bipartisan shift about China in general, which I think will probably encourage increased cooperation between the United States and Australia. This meeting itself, I think, it will be extremely important for that. And I think the Biden administration has made this a real centerpiece of the way that they're thinking about foreign policy.
Let's look at the domestic situation in the US. And one of the issues, New York City is pressuring the Biden administration to help it deal with an increasing number of migrants, which has overwhelmed its homeless shelter system.
Yeah, and this is a situation that we're seeing across the United States. There has been an increasing influx of migrants. There has been sort of a lot of political back and forth, particularly involving Texas and Florida. Texas, of course, is where many of these migrants first enter the country. We're also seeing an increased wave of migrants and other immigration from the north, which is something that hasn't happened, certainly hasn't happened to the same extent as it has to the south. And this has also, I think, put pressure on the Adams administration here in New York City. Eric Adams has been sort of railing about this for quite some time and has tried to increase political pressure sort of from the left on the Biden administration. And this also, I think, whether fairly or not, plays into other ideas, particularly about crime and homelessness in New York City. I think for the Adams administration, what they want is just more aid from the Biden administration so they can deal with this situation. But our immigration system, it has not been changed or updated. We haven't had immigration reform in decades. And what we're seeing now is that system has become completely overwhelmed. There's no political will at all to shift it. So instead we have a situation in which mayors in particular and governors to a lesser extent are essentially, they're putting Band-Aids on a broken system. And what we're seeing here are the sort of cracks of that really being exposed.
Joe Biden's also forecasted huge tax hikes over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, the budget situation here is a little funny because a budget is not going to get passed. So what we're seeing are kind of this dueling sort of political strategies of these two parties. The Biden budget, it's really pushing this idea of deficit reduction, and it's doing that by raising taxes to 25% for Americans who make more than $400,000 a year. Now, the goal here is to put political pressure on Republicans. Republicans have made deficit reduction a huge part of their their campaign message. They are planning on holding the debt ceiling hostage in exchange for quite severe social spending cuts, although we don't know what those are yet now. But the Biden administration is putting out this budget as a kind of trap. Republicans have committed publicly to not cutting or altering, frankly, Social Security or Medicare. So the idea with this budget is to push Republicans to try to say what their cuts, how they would actually reduce the deficit. They probably will not be able to produce a budget that reduces it by $3 trillion, which I believe is what the Biden budget does. But that's what we're going to see. This will be a kind of a political game for the next few months, and these budgets are going to be largely fictional. There's nothing will change because we have a divided government that will find getting anything done, let alone passing a budget, extremely difficult for the next 2 years.
Yeah, Anthony Albanese on his way to the US even as we speak. So we'll watch that with interest, Alex. Always good to chat with you. We'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks.